The wine glass shattered against my face, and for a second, I couldn't even tell if the burning on my skin was wine or blood. My daughter-in-law's scream echoed through the dining room, words I never imagined hearing under my own roof. My son's voice trembled, begging her to stop, but it was already too late. In that moment, something inside me broke, not out of fear, but out of realization. That night would change everything. This is my home, and I don't want anyone, including you, to drink themselves sick at my table. The room went silent. I could feel the weight of Ethan's stare on me, pleading silently for me to drop it. But this wasn't about winning an argument. It was about boundaries, ones that had been eroding ever since the day they moved in. Lauren laughed. It wasn't a pleasant laugh. It was sharp and brittle. "You're home," she repeated mockingly. "God, you say that like we're guests here." She walked to the stand with an air of defiance, her chin lifted high. "Lauren," the lawyer began, "did you ever intend to harm your mother-in-law?" "No," she said sharply. "She provoked me. She's always hated me ever since I married Ethan. She wanted control, not justice." "And the money?" he asked. She hesitated. "We shared accounts. It wasn't theft, it was partnership. Even the withdrawals he didn't authorize." Her lips twitched. "He didn't say no, he just didn't ask." A ripple of disbelief moved through the room. I saw one juror shake his head. Then came the cross-examination. The prosecutor stood slowly, her voice steady but firm. "Mrs. Evans, do you recognize these messages?" Lauren glanced at the screen as the words appeared on the monitor. "When the old lady bites the dust, the house is ours." Her face drained of color. "That's not—" "These were recovered from your personal device," the prosecutor interrupted. "Would you like to deny sending them?" Lauren stammered, but no words came. The prosecutor pressed on. "And what about the forged withdrawals? The restraining order violation? The other incidents in Georgia and Texas? Are they all misunderstandings too?" Lauren's eyes darted wildly. "You're twisting everything," she snapped. "They used me. Men always use me. Even Ethan, he—" "Enough." The judge's voice cut through like thunder. "Mrs. Evans, control yourself." Lauren fell silent, trembling with fury. The prosecutor calmly returned to her seat. By the time the closing statements began, there was no doubt left in anyone's mind. The evidence was airtight. The pattern was unmistakable. Lauren Evans wasn't a victim. She was a predator. When the jury retired to deliberate, the air in the courtroom grew heavy. Ethan and I sat side by side, hands clasped tightly. He hadn't spoken since my testimony. Finally, he whispered, "I can't believe I didn't see it." I squeezed his hand. "That's what abusers do. They make you doubt your eyes, your instincts, even your own worth. You believed because you loved." He nodded slowly. "And she used that against me." "Yes," I said softly. "But love isn't your weakness, Ethan. It's your strength. You just have to give it to the right people." The jury returned after 2 hours. The foreperson stood, a young woman with kind eyes. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Lauren Evans, guilty on all counts." For a moment, the room was utterly still. Then the judge nodded solemnly. "The court hereby sentences the defendant to 6 years in state prison for fraud, 2 years for assault, and 1 year for violation of restraining order sentences to run consecutively. Restitution to be paid to the victims in full." Lauren screamed, "You can't do this to me! I didn't do anything wrong." She lunged toward the table, but the bailiffs restrained her, leading her away as she kicked and shouted. Ethan turned his head away, tears streaking down his face. I reached for his hand again. He gripped mine tightly, as if anchoring himself back to reality. When the gavel struck, I felt a strange stillness settle inside me. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't vengeance. It was release. Afterward, outside the courthouse, the wind carried the faint scent of rain. Ethan and I stood on the steps for a long time without speaking. The weight of years seemed to lift slowly from our shoulders. Finally, he broke the silence. "You saved me." I smiled faintly. "No, sweetheart. You saved yourself. I just helped you see the truth." He exhaled, looking up at the gray sky. "What do we do now?" "Whatever we want," I said softly. "We start again." He nodded, then looked at me with the faintest trace of a smile. "Do you ever miss it? The courtroom?" He shook his head. "Being the one who delivers justice." I thought for a moment. "Sometimes. But I've learned something these past months. Justice isn't only in courtrooms. Sometimes it's in the quiet moments. The forgiveness we give ourselves." We walked to the car, the rain beginning to fall in soft, cold drops. Ethan slipped his jacket over my shoulders. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said. "You never gave up." I looked at him, truly looked, and saw not the broken man who had once sat crying in my kitchen, but someone reborn, stronger, wiser. And for the first time in a very long time, I allowed myself to cry not from pain, but from relief. When we reached home, the air smelled of rain and lavender. The broken glass had long been cleaned, the walls freshly painted. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt lived in, safe again. "We've been paying bills, helping around, barely," I said, before I could stop myself. Her eyes flashed with rage. "You think you're still in charge, don't you? Still the great Judge Evans, controlling everything and everyone around you. But guess what, Margaret? This isn't your courtroom." The word stung, but I didn't show it. I had faced murderers, thieves, and liars in my career. I could face one angry woman at my dinner table. As I brewed us tea, Ethan stood by the window watching the storm outside. "Do you think she'll ever change?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," I said. "Some people learn, some don't. But that's not our story anymore." He smiled softly, turning toward me. "No, I guess it's not." The thunder rolled in the distance, soft and distant, like applause from the heavens. And for the first time, I let myself exhale fully, deeply, completely. Because justice wasn't just served in court that day. It was restored in our hearts. People often think healing begins when the pain ends. But I've learned that's not true. Healing begins the moment you choose yourself, even when it breaks your heart to do it. For years, I believed strength meant holding everyone together, being the mother, the fixer, the one who made sure things didn't fall apart. But sometimes, strength is standing still while everything around you crumbles, trusting that what's meant to stay will rebuild itself on solid ground. When Lauren was sentenced, I thought I would feel vindicated. I thought I would walk out of that courthouse lighter. But instead, I felt something quieter, a deep, aching sadness. Because even after all she'd done, a part of me still wished she had chosen differently. I didn't want to destroy her. I wanted her to find the goodness she'd buried so far inside that even she couldn't see it anymore. But life doesn't always give us neat endings. Some people never say sorry. Some wounds never get closure. And that's okay. Because healing isn't about getting an apology, it's about reclaiming your peace. Ethan and I are still healing. There are days when the memories surface like bruises, tender, unexpected. But we're learning to fill our home with laughter again. We garden, we cook, we talk about the future, without flinching. Sometimes, when the house is quiet at night, I sit on the porch and listen to the rain. The same porch where I once stood terrified, waiting for police sirens to save me. Now, that sound brings peace, because it reminds me how far we've come and how much we survived. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone listening to my story, it's this. Don't confuse endurance with love. Don't let someone convince you that silence is noble or suffering is proof of devotion. You have the right to be safe. You have the right to peace. You have the right to walk away, even from the people you love, when they've stopped loving you in return. Justice isn't always served in courtrooms. Sometimes it's found in the quiet decision to never let someone break you again. My name is Margaret Evans. I'm 62 years old. I've lost, I've hurt, and I've learned. And if my story finds its way to you, I hope it reminds you that it's never too late to stand up, to rebuild, and to love yourself enough to start again. Thank you for listening. And if my story touched your heart, stay with me for more stories of strength, healing, and the power we all carry inside. Your support means more than you'll ever know. If that's truly how you feel, I said softly, then perhaps you and Ethan should consider finding your own place. Ethan's fork clattered against his plate. Mom, but Lauren cut him off. Oh, don't you dare, Ethan. Don't you dare take her side again. She turned back to me. You just can't stand that he chose me, that you're no longer the most important woman in his life. That's not true, I replied, my voice steady though my hands trembled slightly under the table. But I won't tolerate disrespect, not from anyone. Then maybe you shouldn't invite people to live in your shrine of a house, if you expect them to bow down to your rules. She spat. I exhaled slowly, trying to ground myself. Lauren, I think we should end this conversation. She raised her glass, shaking it in my direction. You think you can tell me when to stop drinking? When to talk? You think you can control me the way you controlled everyone in your courtroom? I didn't answer. Silence was my only defense now. Pour me another, she ordered. No. That single word broke something in her. Her face twisted anger, humiliation. Something darker flickered in her eyes. Before I could move, she hurled the glass straight at me. The sound was deafening. The glass shattered against my temple, a searing sting spreading across my face. For a moment, I just sat there, stunned. The red wine mixed with blood, dripping onto my white blouse. Ethan jumped from his chair. Lauren, what the hell are you doing? She froze, her hand still raised, her expression flickering between shock and defiance. She provoked me, she shouted. She thinks she's better than everyone. My son looked at me, horror etched across his face. I pressed a napkin to my wound, feeling the warmth of blood seep through the fabric. My heart was pounding, not just from pain, but from disbelief. 30 years of enforcing justice, and here I was, bleeding at my own dining table. Ethan, I said quietly, my voice trembling only slightly, take your wife upstairs. Now. He hesitated, torn between us, then gently took Lauren by the arm. She pulled away, muttering curses as she stumbled up the stairs. The sound of their bedroom door slamming echoed through the house. For a moment, everything went still. Only the faint ticking of the kitchen clock filled the silence. I walked to the bathroom, hands shaking, and examined the cut in the mirror. It wasn't deep, but it bled profusely, tracing a crimson line along my temple. I rinsed it under cold water, the sting reminding me that I was still in control, or at least I needed to be. Old habits resurfaced. Evidence, documentation, logic. I took my phone, photographed the wound, the wine stains, the broken shards on the floor. I placed the pieces into a plastic bag. 30 years as a judge had taught me one truth above all. Justice begins with evidence. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my study, pressing an ice pack to my head, the glow of the desk lamp illuminating the papers scattered across the desk. Ethan's laughter from his childhood echoed faintly in my mind, birthday candles, piano recitals, late-night talks about college. When had it all turned into this? The law had always been my armor, but now it would become my weapon. At 6 minutes past midnight, I made the call. Miami Police Department, the voice on the other end said. How can I help you? I took a deep breath. I'd like to report a case of assault, I replied. And just like that, the quiet, fragile peace of my home shattered for good. By the time the first light crept through the curtains, I was still sitting in my office, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of lavender detergent. My head throbbed dully beneath the cold compress, but I didn't feel tired. I felt awake, sharper than I had in months. If you want to know what really happened next, stay tuned and support this channel. Dinner had always been my small ritual of peace. Every Friday evening, since Ethan and Lauren moved back in temporarily, I'd cook something elaborate, a way to keep our little family anchored amid their chaotic schedules. 6 months had passed since they promised they'd only stay for a couple of months. Yet the boxes in the guest room had never moved. The excuses had only grown more creative. The shock had burned away every ounce of hesitation inside me. At exactly 7:30, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find a middle-aged police officer standing on the porch. His hair was silver at the temples, his eyes kind but professional. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, showing me his badge. "Officer Davis, we received a call about an alleged assault?" "Yes," I said quietly, stepping aside. "Please, come in." I led him toward the dining room. The table was still frozen in time the half-eaten meal, the spilled wine, the shards of broken glass that I'd carefully arranged in small, labeled envelopes during my sleepless night. The scene looked eerily like a crime scene from my old courtroom cases. "It happened right here," I said, my voice even, clinical. "My daughter-in-law threw this glass at my face after I refused to pour her more wine. She'd already consumed far too much." The officer examined the scene with a slow nod, jotting notes into a small pad. I showed him the photos on my phone, the cut on my temple, the wine stains, the trail of glass. Then I guided his attention to the plastic bag of shards I'd collected. He looked up at me, a faint trace of surprise in his eyes. "You seem very thorough, ma'am." "I was a criminal judge for 30 years, I replied simply. "Old habits die hard." He nodded, scribbling something else down. "Is the suspect still in the residence?" "Yes," I said. "She's upstairs. Sleeping, I presume. With my son." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Would you like to file a formal complaint?" For a moment, my breath caught in my chest. Filing meant consequences for Lauren, for Ethan, for all of us. But the memory of that glass slicing through the air, the look of pure contempt in her eyes, erased my hesitation. "Yes," I said finally. "I do." We sat at the kitchen table as he filled out the report. Full name of the aggressor, relationship to the victim, detailed account of the event. I recited each fact as if I were dictating a verdict. Steady, emotionless, exact. My voice didn't tremble once. We were just finishing when I heard the faint sound of footsteps above us. Then another. The soft creak of the stairs. Ethan appeared first, barefoot, his hair disheveled, eyes swollen with sleep. His gaze shifted from me to the officer, confusion quickly turning to dread. "Mom, what's going on?" Before I could answer, Lauren stepped into the kitchen doorway behind him. She was wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and leggings, her face pale and puffy, but the defiance in her posture was still there. "What the hell is this?" she demanded. The officer rose from his chair, polite but firm. "Mrs. Lauren Evans? I'm Officer Davis. I'm here to investigate a report of assault that occurred in this residence last night." Ethan blinked rapidly. "Wait, what? Mom, you called the police? Against Lauren?" "She assaulted me, Ethan," I said softly. "She threw a glass at my face and cut me." Lauren's mouth twisted into a sneer. "Oh, for God's sake! It was an accident. She was provoking me. Being intoxicated is not a legal defense for physical assault." The officer interrupted, still calm. "Mrs. Evans, I'm going to need you to come with me to the station to make a statement." Lauren's voice rose an octave. "You're going to arrest me over a broken glass?" "At this stage, ma'am," he replied evenly. "I'm only requesting your cooperation for a statement. Depending on the evidence, charges may follow." Ethan stepped between us, his eyes wide with panic. Please, can we all just calm down? We can handle this within the family. Mom, she didn't mean it. I met his gaze, and for a moment, I saw my little boy again, the one who used to cling to my leg when thunder scared him. But he wasn't that boy anymore. And I wasn't just his mother. I was a woman who had been attacked in her own home. Ethan, I said quietly, we've been trying to handle things within the family for 6 months. But last night, Lauren crossed a line. She's my wife, he said, his voice cracking. And I'm your mother, I replied. And this is my house. For a heartbeat, none of us moved. The air between us was thick enough to cut. Then Lauren let out a bitter laugh. You'll regret this, old woman, she spat, stepping forward until the officer blocked her path. Ma'am, he warned gently, please don't make any threats. Lauren's eyes burned into mine as she was escorted out the front door. Ethan followed, crying openly now, his voice cracking as he pleaded with her to calm down. That night, I'd made a slow-roasted prime rib, seasoned the way my late husband loved it, and set the table with the best china. The chandelier above the dining table shimmered softly, reflecting off the crystal glasses I'd inherited from my grandmother, the same ones I used only on special occasions. Maybe that was my mistake. I still believed in small traditions, in order and respect, even when the world outside had changed so much. Maybe that made me seem rigid to someone like Lauren. The front door slammed, and the house fell silent again. I stood in the doorway, my hand still resting on the edge of the table. The bruised skin at my temple pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt hollow. An hour later, Ethan returned. His eyes were red, his shoulders slumped. She's at the station, he said quietly. They said she'll probably be released later today. I nodded. That's up to the authorities. Em? He stared at me for a long time, his voice trembling when he finally spoke. How could you do this? She's my wife. She's also an abuser, Ethan, I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. She needs help, and you need protection. You don't get it, he snapped. You've always hated her. You've been waiting for an excuse to get rid of her. That's not true, I said, trying to reach him. I wanted to welcome her. I wanted you both to build your life here. But she's been cruel to you. To me. To everyone who doesn't bend to her will. He shook his head, his jaw tight. It's always the same with you. The law above everything. The rules. The evidence. You can't turn off the judge, even for your own family. His words hit harder than the glass. I did this because I love you, I whispered. Because I won't stand by while someone destroys you. He looked away, his voice barely audible. No, Mom. You did this because you need to be right. He grabbed his car keys from the counter and walked toward the door. I'm going to get her. We'll stay somewhere else for a while. Ethan, please. But he didn't look back. The door closed behind him with a soft click that felt louder than any slam. The silence that followed was suffocating. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the half-empty coffee mug the officer had left behind. For years, I'd prided myself on my composure, my ability to separate emotion from judgment. But that morning, for the first time, I felt the full cost of it. I had enforced justice countless times from the bench, but I had never felt it bleed so personally through the walls of my own home. Hours passed. The afternoon sunlight crept across the floor, warm and indifferent. I tried to read, to eat, to busy my hands with the small tasks of daily life, but every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards echoed with the question I didn't want to face. Had I lost my son forever? That night, the phone rang. I knew it was him before I even picked up. Mom? His voice was cold, distant. Lauren was released. We're staying at a friend's place for now. I see, I said quietly. Are you all right? We're fine. Don't worry about us. We'll come by tomorrow to get our things. Ethan, please listen. I've made my decision, Mom. I stand with my wife. The line went dead. For a long time, I just stood there, holding the phone, listening to the hollow buzz of the dial tone. Then, slowly, I set it down and walked into my study. I opened a new folder on my computer. I named it Case, Lauren. Inside, I began documenting everything: the report, the photos, the officer's statement. I told myself it wasn't revenge. It was preparation, protection. But deep down, I knew it was also something else. The only way I knew how to cope with loss. By turning it into order, into structure, into something I could understand. Because that night, as I sat alone in my silent house, I realized something I had never wanted to admit. Sometimes justice doesn't bring peace. Sometimes it just leaves you with an emptier kind of silence. The next morning came heavy and gray, the kind of sky that looks like it's holding back rain. The house felt unnaturally still, too clean, too empty. I'd changed the locks the night before, not out of vengeance, but precaution. When someone throws glass at your face, you stop assuming they'll respect your boundaries. I made myself coffee, though it tasted like ash. Every clink of the spoon echoed in the kitchen, like a reminder of everything that had shattered: the glass, the peace, and maybe even my family. By noon, I'd decided that sitting in that silence was its own kind of punishment. So I did what I'd always done when faced with chaos. I built a case. Not against Lauren, not yet, but against my own uncertainty. I started with facts. Lauren had claimed she was stressed because of her job. She arrived later than usual, around 7:30, the sharp click of her heels echoing across the hardwood floor. She didn't greet me. She didn't even greet Ethan. She just threw her designer purse onto the couch, muttered something under her breath, and went straight to the bar cart in the corner. "Rough day?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She poured herself a heavy glass of Cabernet, almost to the rim, and tossed it back like water. "You could say that," she muttered. But I couldn't shake the sense that her anger that night wasn't just about the wine. It was something deeper, darker, like she'd been living on the edge of a lie that was starting to collapse. So I called someone who had always been good at uncovering lies. Rick Dawson had been one of the finest detectives I'd ever worked with during my years on the bench. He retired a few years before I did, trading the badge for a quieter life, running a private investigation firm out of a small office downtown. When he picked up the phone, his voice carried that same low, steady tone I remembered. "Margaret Evans. Haven't heard that name in too long. You still making people nervous just by walking into a room?" "Not anymore," I said with a faint laugh. "These days, I just make them uncomfortable at the dinner table." Rick chuckled softly. "What's going on, Judge?" I told him everything: the dinner, the assault, the police report, Ethan leaving with Lauren. He listened in silence, not interrupting once. When I finished, I exhaled, realizing how long I'd been holding my breath. "I need your help," I said finally. "Something about Lauren doesn't add up. I can't prove it yet, but I can feel it. She's not just angry, she's hiding something." There was a pause, then his voice grew serious. "You think it's criminal?" "I don't know, but I'd rather know than wonder." "Send me what you have," he said. "Full name, birth date, employment details, whatever you can find. I'll dig discreetly." By the time I hung up, I already felt that familiar pulse of purpose again. That mix of dread and focus that used to carry me through the most complicated cases. Only this time, the case was personal. That afternoon, I parked my car 2 blocks from the house and waited. I couldn't bear the idea of being there when Ethan and Lauren came to collect their belongings. Watching them pack up what little remained of their lives here would be like watching someone peel away the last layer of my heart. Through the car window, I saw their car pull into the driveway. Ethan got out first. He looked exhausted, pale, his movements stiff and mechanical. Lauren followed, sunglasses covering half her face despite the overcast sky. She didn't look around, didn't hesitate. She just went inside. For nearly 2 hours, I watched them move through the house like ghosts. Once, I saw Ethan pause at the window of the dining room, his old spot at the table, but Lauren tugged at his sleeve, and he moved on. When they finally left, the car trunk was packed full. I waited another 20 minutes before going back inside. The air smelled like her perfume, heavy, synthetic, the kind that lingered long after she was gone. The guest room was stripped bare except for the furniture. The bed sheets were gone, the drawers emptied, even a few of the towels from the linen closet missing. But what caught my attention was subtler. A small jewelry box on my dresser, the one that held my mother's gold brooch, was open, empty. I stood there for a long time, staring at the space where it had been. It wasn't the value that hurt. It was what it meant. That brooch had been with me through law school, my wedding, my husband's funeral. Ethan knew that. He would never take it. Lauren, however, I wanted to believe it was an oversight. But deep down, I knew better. Over the next few days, the silence of the house settled like a fog. Ethan didn't call. Neither did Lauren. I tried to lose myself in routine, watering the garden, organizing old case files, reading, but my mind kept returning to that night, to her eyes, to the word she'd used, superior. That's what she saw when she looked at me. Not a mother, not a woman, but an obstacle. On Wednesday, I finally got Rick's call. "I've got something," he said. "And Margaret, you might want to sit down." I did. "She's been unemployed for 3 months," he said. "Got fired from her job after missing deadlines and clashing with her manager. But that's not the real problem. She's got 5 credit cards, all maxed out close to $800,000 in debt." I closed my eyes. 800? That's not all. 2 of those cards are in Ethan's name. I'm guessing she used his information, or some kind of joint authorization. And here's the kicker: there have been 3 major withdrawals from Ethan's retirement account in the last 2 months. My boss is an idiot. He made me redo an entire presentation because apparently it wasn't client-friendly enough. As if he knows anything about marketing. Before I could respond, she refilled her glass a second one and finally sat down at the table. Ethan followed quietly behind, placing the serving dishes with his usual nervous precision. My son had always been gentle, a peacemaker, the kind of man who hated conflict so much that he'd rather absorb it all just to keep the peace. 400,000 total. My pulse quickened. He would never touch that account. It's his safety net. Exactly. So either she convinced him somehow, or she forged it. The words fell heavy between us. Rick continued, his voice low. "And there's more. She's got a few complaints under her name, bounced checks, unpaid rent, even an eviction notice from her last apartment before she married Ethan. And, we found some online posts, private messages between her and friends. She talks about inheriting a house soon. Says, and I quote, 'When the old lady bites the dust.'" For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The air in the room thickened. My heartbeat drummed in my ears. "Rick," I whispered finally. "The old lady. That's me." "I know," he said quietly. "I'm sorry." I pressed my hand to my chest, as if I could physically hold my heart still. "You think she's dangerous?" "I think she's desperate," Rick said. "And desperate people make dangerous decisions. If she's already sinking financially, and she sees you as standing between her and security." He trailed off. He didn't have to finish. I'd seen enough cases to know where that road led. "Keep digging," I said, my voice cold, steady. "If she accessed Ethan's accounts without authorization, I want proof. If she forged anything, I want documentation. I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with." "I'll handle it," he said. "And Margaret, lock your doors, keep your phone close, just in case." After I hung up, I sat in the silence for a long while. Then I walked to the study, opened my Case Lauren folder, and began adding the new information. Financial crimes, forgery, emotional manipulation, potential motive for inheritance. Each word I typed felt like a nail sealing a coffin I never wanted to build. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I made myself a cup of tea I never drank. My reflection in the window looked older than I remembered. Maybe it was the bruise still fading at my temple, or maybe it was the weight of what I'd learned. Lauren wasn't just cruel, she was calculated. And Ethan, my poor, sweet Ethan, was trapped in her web. For the first time, I understood the gravity of what I was up against. This wasn't a family dispute, it was a criminal pattern, and it had my son's life wrapped tightly in its grip. That night, I called the locksmith again and upgraded every lock in the house. I installed a new security system, motion lights, cameras. Not out of fear, out of habit. When you've spent 3 decades sending criminals to prison, you learn the difference between paranoia and preparedness. The next morning, I received another call. It was the clerk from the courthouse. The preliminary hearing for the assault charge had been scheduled for the following week. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 30 years, I'd sat on the other side of that bench, listening to stories of family violence, abuse, betrayal. I'd thought I understood justice, but standing there in the courtroom, as a victim, not a judge, was something entirely different. The weight of the gavel was no longer in my hand. It was over my head. Walking into the courthouse after retirement felt like stepping into a memory I didn't want to revisit. The familiar scent of polished wood and old paper hung in the air. The quiet hum of voices, the squeak of shoes against the marble floor, the faint echo of gavels in distant rooms, it all felt the same, except this time I wasn't Judge Evans. This time, I was the victim. As I approached the courtroom doors, a young clerk recognized me. "Judge Evans, I mean Mrs. Evans," he stammered. I gave him a small, weary smile. "It's all right, son," I said. "Just Margaret now." Inside, the room felt smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had simply become more human, less untouchable. The benches were half full, a few reporters, a few curious faces. People whispered my name like it was part of a ghost story. Lauren sat at the defendant's table, her expression carefully composed. Her lawyer, a nervous young man who looked barely old enough to rent a car, whispered something to her. She ignored him, eyes fixed straight ahead. Ethan wasn't beside her. For a moment, I felt both relief and pain. The judge assigned to the case was Sarah Jennings, competent, fair, one of the last judges I'd mentored before retiring. When she saw me, her expression softened briefly before she regained her judicial composure. Case number 5841, State of Florida versus Lauren Evans, she read aloud. Hearing Lauren's name like that versus the state sent a small chill through me. The prosecutor summarized the charge: misdemeanor battery, alcohol-related assault, and property damage. I sometimes worried that Lauren saw that as weakness. We began eating, or at least tried to. I asked Ethan about his week at the clinic, about the new rescue dog he'd mentioned. He smiled faintly, but Lauren interrupted almost immediately. "That clinic is such a waste of your time," she said, her voice already sharp with irritation. "You could make double in private practice, but no, you'd rather spend your life fixing strays and taking pay cuts." "Lauren, please," Ethan murmured. Straightforward, factual. The kind of case I'd heard 1,000 times before. Lauren's lawyer stood, adjusting his tie nervously. "Your Honor," he began. This was an isolated domestic dispute, a moment of stress and intoxication, not a crime born of malice. My client deeply regrets her behavior and has expressed remorse. We request leniency in sentencing, community service, and counseling rather than incarceration. He sounded rehearsed, desperate. The judge nodded. "Does the victim wish to make a statement?" I rose, my knees trembling slightly. The eyes in the room turned toward me, but I didn't feel fear, only an odd, steady calm. "Your Honor," I said, my voice clear though my throat felt tight. "I'm not seeking revenge or harsh punishment. I'm seeking safety and accountability. The assault happened in my home, by someone I took in out of love. I ask only that the court ensure this doesn't happen again to me or to anyone." M. Lauren's gaze flickered toward me just for a second, and for the first time, I saw something behind the mask. Not remorse, not fear, but calculation. After a brief recess, Judge Jennings delivered her decision. Given the evidence presented and the absence of prior criminal convictions, the court sentences the defendant to 6 months of community service, mandatory participation in anger management therapy, and a temporary restraining order. The defendant shall not approach within 100 yards of the victim or her residence for 90 days. Lauren's face turned pale. She whispered something to her lawyer, who shook his head. The order was final. A restraining order meant she couldn't return to my home, the home she and Ethan had lived in for half a year, the home she'd quietly started to believe could one day be hers. As the hearing ended, I gathered my purse and turned to leave. That's when I saw him sitting quietly in the last row, half hidden behind a pillar. Ethan. Our eyes met for the first time since he'd left. He looked thinner, tired, a shadow of the man he once was. I wanted to run to him, to tell him everything I'd discovered, but the moment wasn't right. He wouldn't believe me yet. Outside, the sun was blinding. As I stepped down the courthouse stairs, Ethan caught up with me. "Mom," he said, his voice hoarse. "Can we talk?" "Of course," I said. "Always." We sat at a coffee shop across the street, neutral ground, the kind of place where strangers could cry without being noticed. Ethan stirred his coffee without drinking it. "The restraining order, it complicates things," he said quietly. "We've been staying at Patty's apartment. The couch is killing my back, and her patience is wearing thin. You could rent a small place?" I suggested softly. "Even just for you." He shook his head. "With what money? My paycheck barely covers our expenses, and Lauren still hasn't found a new job." Still. He still believed she was working. "Ethan," I said gently, "when was the last time you checked your accounts?" He frowned. "Why?" "Your retirement. Your savings. Your credit cards. Have you looked at them lately?" He looked puzzled. "No, I set everything to automatic. Why are you asking?" I took a deep breath. I'd promised myself I wouldn't ambush him, but there was no other way. "Because I have reason to believe Lauren's been using your accounts without your permission." His spoon froze mid-stir. "What are you talking about?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder, neat, thick, organized. I slid it across the table. "Take a look." He opened it hesitantly. His eyes moved down the page, first in confusion, then disbelief, and finally horror. "These can't be real," he whispered. "I didn't make these withdrawals." "They're real," I said quietly. 3 in total, $400,000. And that's not counting the credit cards, 5 of them, 2 in your name." He looked up at me, pale and shaking. "How do you even have this?" "I hired someone," I admitted. "An investigator I used to work with." "You investigated my wife?" His voice cracked between outrage and hurt. "I investigated to protect you," I said firmly. "Ethan, she's drowning in debt. She's been lying about her job for months. You needed to know." He leaned back, running his hands through his hair. No. Maybe she was desperate. Maybe she thought she'd fix it before I found out. Desperation doesn't explain deception," I replied softly. "Or fraud." He slammed his hand on the table, eyes glistening. "You just want her gone. You've never liked her." I swallowed hard. "And yet here we are. She assaulted me, emptied your accounts, and forged your name." "What?" "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." She rolled her eyes dramatically. then took another gulp of wine. Some people don't know how to aim higher. I swallowed my words. Years on the bench had taught me patience and the danger of reacting too soon. I tried to change the subject, asking about the new book club I'd joined. She smirked. "Book club? How adorable," she said, leaning back. "What else has to happen before you see what she's doing to you?" He pressed his hands to his temples, shaking. I don't know what to believe anymore." I hesitated, then took out one last document screenshots of messages Rick had found. "There's more." Ethan read them slowly, then stopped. His hand trembled as he whispered the words aloud. "When the old lady bites the dust," his voice broke. He looked at me, eyes wide with disbelief. "She was talking about you?" I nodded once. For a moment, he just stared, then exhaled a shaky breath that sounded almost like a sob. "Oh God." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his face buried in his hands. "I thought she loved me. I reached across the table and placed my hand on his. "Abusers don't start with cruelty. They start with charm." He looked up, eyes full of shame. "What do I do now?" "You come home," I said. "You get out before she takes more from you." Hay hesitated. "She'll go crazy when she realizes I left." "That's exactly why you have to leave. She's not just unstable, she's dangerous." Ethan was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly, as if something inside him had finally broken free. "Okay, let's go." The drive home was quiet. He stared out the window, his reflection pale against the glass. I didn't speak. Some moments require silence to heal. When we arrived, I opened the door to his old room. It still smelled faintly of cedar and the aftershave he used in college. I changed the sheets, opened the curtains, set a vase of fresh flowers on the nightstand. "This is still your home," I said softly. He nodded, eyes glassy. "Thank you, Mom." That night, as I washed the dinner dishes, I heard the faint sound of crying from down the hall. For the first time in months, I didn't feel helpless. He was home. He was safe. And for the first time since that shattered glass cut through my skin, I finally believed that maybe, just maybe, justice had found its way back to our lives. But as I dried the dishes, I couldn't ignore the uneasy truth in my chest. Lauren wasn't done. Women like her never were. The days that followed Ethan's return home were quiet, almost tender in their simplicity. We found comfort in routine. Breakfast together, long talks about the future. Evenings spent painting his old room a soft sky blue. Each brushstroke felt like a small piece of healing covering over years of chaos, layer by layer. But peace, as I'd learned too many times in life, is never permanent. It's only a pause between storms. It started with the phone. Ethan's phone began buzzing every few minutes. Calls, texts, voicemails. Lauren's name flashed across the screen over and over. He ignored the first dozen, then finally turned it off. "She'll calm down," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "She's not the kind that calms down," I replied quietly. That night, I awoke to the sound of banging. Loud, furious, desperate. My heart leapt into my throat. I reached for my robe, hurried down the hall, and saw Ethan already standing by the front door. The pounding grew louder. "Ethan!" Lauren's voice screamed from outside. "I know you're in there. Open this damn door." Ethan's face went pale. She can't be here. There's a restraining order, which she's violating," I said, picking up my phone. My voice was calm, deliberate, the same tone I used when directing chaos in the courtroom. "Call 911. Now." The banging turned into kicks. "Ethan, you're not going to hide behind that old witch forever." The words cut through the wood like knives. I pressed the phone to my ear. "This is Margaret Evans," I told the dispatcher. "My daughter-in-law is violating a restraining order. She's attempting to break into my home. The dispatcher's voice was steady. Stay on the line, ma'am. Officers are on the way. Do not open the door. Lauren's voice grew shriller. Ethan, come out! We can fix this. I love you. Then, without missing a beat, her tone flipped, venomous. You're nothing without me. You think she'll save you? She'll die before she lets you go. Ethan sank onto the couch, trembling, his hands covering his face. Oh God, he whispered. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Look at me, I said. You're safe. You're not that scared boy anymore. You are stronger than her now. Outside, headlights flashed through the window. Sirens cut through the night. 2 police cruisers screeched into the driveway. Officers jumped out, flashlights raised. Police! One of them shouted. Step away from the door. So you and your retired friends sit around drinking tea and gossiping about fictional people? Sounds thrilling. Ethan lowered his head. I caught his apologetic glance, and I gave him a small nod, as if to say it's all right. But it wasn't. Every time she opened her mouth, she took another sip. The more she drank, the looser her tongue became, and the tighter my patience grew. Through the window, I saw Lauren freeze. Her hair was tangled, her makeup smeared, her face twisted with rage and desperation. He's my husband, she screamed. You can't keep me from him. But they could, and they did. Within minutes, they had her in handcuffs. As they led her toward the patrol car, she looked back at the house, her eyes finding mine through the window. This isn't over, Margaret, she hissed. You'll regret this. The words were low, but they landed like a curse. After they drove away, Ethan and I stood in silence. His shoulders shook, and when he finally spoke, his voice cracked. She's really gone this time, isn't she? For now, I said softly. But people like Lauren, they don't disappear quietly. The next morning, the phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Ethan's, it was mine. Margaret, it's Rick. His voice sounded grimmer than usual. You sitting down? I sat at the kitchen table, the faint smell of coffee still hanging in the air. Go ahead. We dug deeper, he said. Lauren's name popped up in 2 other states, different last names, but the same pattern. Domestic disturbances, financial fraud, restraining orders. Atlanta, 5 years ago. Dallas, 3 years ago. I closed my eyes. What happened? In Atlanta, the charges were dropped. The victim was a widower, mid-40s, lost nearly all his savings before she disappeared. In Dallas, she settled out of court with another man, an older business consultant. He paid her to walk away. And now, he sighed. Now she's here, repeating the same cycle. I pressed a hand against my forehead. She's a predator. Worse, Rick said. She's a repeat offender who's learned how to make the system work for her. But this time, we have more than angry texts and missing money. We have evidence bank records, messages, her violation of the restraining order. We can make this stick. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. Then we go all the way. Oh, I'll coordinate with the detective on her new arrest, Rick said. They'll add charges for the violation, plus the financial crimes once we finalize the reports. When I hung up, I just sat there for a long while, the phone still in my hand. Outside, the morning light had turned the garden gold, but I couldn't feel its warmth. This wasn't just justice anymore, it was survival. Later that day, Ethan came into the kitchen. He looked like he hadn't slept, dark circles under his eyes, the faint tremor of exhaustion in his hands. What did Rick say? He asked quietly. I told him everything. The other men, the settlements, the lies. He listened without interrupting, but with every new detail, I could see another piece of him crumble. So I wasn't special, he said finally. His voice was barely a whisper. I was just next. You were her target, I said softly. Because you're good. Because you trust. She knew how to twist that into something she could control. Ethan stared at the floor. What kind of person does that? The kind who knows how to use love as a weapon, I said. The kind who mistakes kindness for weakness. He looked up at me, tears brimming. I feel so stupid. I stepped closer, placing a hand on his cheek. Don't. Victims always think they should have known better. But you can't predict evil. You can only survive it. He nodded, wiping his face. So what happens now? We press charges, I said. We finish this. That afternoon, we drove to the attorney's office, Rebecca, the same lawyer who'd handled the assault case. She greeted us with her usual calm professionalism, her eyes full of quiet sympathy. Lauren's in custody, she confirmed. The DA's office is reviewing the new evidence, the financial crimes, the violation, and the past records Rick uncovered. This could escalate from a misdemeanor to felony-level charges. It's serious. Ethan looked conflicted. I don't want her to rot in prison, he said. I just want this to stop. Rebecca nodded. Justice isn't about revenge, Ethan. It's about protection. We'll make sure you're both safe first. Then the law will take care of the rest. When we left her office, Ethan stopped by the courthouse steps, looking up at the flag fluttering above. You stood here every day for 30 years, he said softly. You must have seen so many people lose everything. I did, I admitted. But I also saw people rebuild. He turned to me. Do you think we can? I smiled faintly. We already are. That evening, the house felt lighter. We cooked dinner together, pasta and garlic bread. Nothing fancy. For the first time in months, Ethan laughed. A small laugh, hesitant, but real. After we ate, we sat on the porch. The night air was cool, filled with the faint chirp of crickets. Ethan leaned back, exhaling deeply. It's strange, he said. By the end of the second bottle, I noticed the slight slur in her voice, the way her laughter carried just a hint too much bitterness. When she reached for the third bottle, I instinctively placed my hand over it. I think that's enough for tonight, I said gently. Her hand froze. Excuse me? You've had quite a bit, dear. Maybe switch to water. Her lips parted into a smirk, then curled into something colder. Are you serious right now? Yes, I replied calmly. I thought I'd feel broken after losing her. But I just feel free. That's the thing about freedom, I said. It doesn't always feel good at first. Sometimes it just feels quiet. He smiled faintly. Quiet's not so bad. We stayed there a while, listening to the night settle around us. The next morning, Rick called again. Margaret, there's one more thing, he said. We found evidence Lauren's been researching inheritance law specifically, how to ensure spousal rights in case of a sudden death. My stomach turned. You think she… I can't say for sure, he interrupted, but I've seen enough patterns to know what that kind of search usually means. I hung up slowly, the phone feeling suddenly heavy in my hand. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the morning sunlight spilling across the floor. It looked warm, safe, ordinary, the kind of morning I'd once taken for granted. But I knew better now. Evil doesn't always wear a mask or carry a weapon. Sometimes it smiles at your dinner table and calls you Mom. The trial began on a cold Thursday morning, nearly 3 months after Lauren's arrest. By then, the bruises on my face had long faded, but the ache behind my ribs remained a reminder that not all wounds were visible. The courthouse was buzzing. Lauren's case had drawn attention from the local news. A former judge standing against her own daughter-in-law made for sensational headlines. I tried to block it all out, focusing only on the rhythm of my breath. In, out, steady. When the bailiff called my name, I walked into the courtroom not as Judge Evans, but as Margaret, a woman who had endured, who had survived. Ethan walked beside me, his shoulders squared, but his eyes wary. He hadn't been sleeping well. Nightmares still woke him some nights. But he was here, and that mattered more than anything. Lauren sat across the aisle, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The bright orange of her prison uniform looked harsh under the fluorescent lights. For a fleeting second, I almost pitied her. Almost. Then I remembered her voice that night at the door, and the pity burned away. The prosecution began with a calm, factual tone. They laid out the evidence: the restraining order violation, the fraudulent withdrawals, the credit cards, the pattern of manipulation across multiple states. Each piece fit neatly into the next. A puzzle of deceit that Lauren could no longer hide behind charm or excuses. When the financial investigator took the stand, he detailed the bank records, the forged signatures, the withdrawals made while Ethan was at work, the accounts funneled through aliases connected to Lauren's previous addresses. The jurors leaned forward, their faces tightening. Lauren's lawyer tried to fight back. "My client suffers from emotional trauma," he said, pacing dramatically. "Her actions were not malicious, they were acts of desperation, born from fear of abandonment." It was the same argument I'd heard 1,000 times from defendants who refused to take responsibility. Then it was my turn. When the bailiff called me to the stand, the courtroom went quiet. I felt the weight of every eye, every whisper. I took the oath, placed my hand down, and looked toward the jury. "I spent 30 years up there," I said, glancing toward the judge's bench, listening to stories of pain, betrayal, and survival. I thought I'd seen it all, but I never imagined that one day I'd be the one sitting here. I paused, letting my words settle. Lauren Evans came into my home as family. I offered her shelter, trust, love. But behind that smile, she was calculating. She exploited my son's kindness, drained his savings, and turned our house into a battlefield. The night she threw that glass, that wasn't a mistake. That was control slipping away. And when control slips from people like her, they lash out. Lauren's eyes flashed, her jaw tightening. "I don't stand here because I hate her," I continued softly. "I stand here because I love my son. Because abuse isn't always visible, and victims aren't always who you expect. Sometimes they wear suits, sometimes they sit on the bench, sometimes they're mothers who just wanted peace." When I finished, the courtroom was silent. Even the judge, a seasoned veteran, looked moved. Lauren's lawyer called her next.